Welcome everybody to Tuesday Tea Time on Thursday in Australia, Wednesday in the US. I am not consistent at all, but as you guys know, that's how it's been for the last couple of weeks as I've been traveling. So we're just going to run with it. I know some of you guys watch this in real time. Some of you guys will watch this in the replay. However you enjoy it, welcome to Tea Time. So I thought I would talk today a little bit about a question worth asking. I just got off a call with Jane Pike and Chantel Pratt and Kate Sandel, and this will be available on Jane Pike's podcasts. And it was a great conversation. Why was it a great conversation? I think the reason it really was a great conversation is because Jane asks good questions. She asks good questions that lead to good answers. And it was fun to be along for the ride. And it got me thinking a little bit about the questions we ask our horses. I really believe that relationships are made up of questions and answers. And it can be seen from a number of different ways. So when I was in a more stressed period of my life, I said that all life is made up of problems. Life is just solving one problem after another. And that has a ring of truth to it sometimes. Life is just a series of problems that we solve. But as you get to a time or place in your life where you feel a little less stressed, instead of solving a problem, it starts to feel a little bit more like answering a question. Good morning, Zoe. Welcome. I feel like some consideration about which questions are worth asking is a fun way to direct our thoughts, particularly when it comes to training our horses. So the way that I interpret this is by spending some time looking at what's important to my horse. And if I can see what's important to them, if I ask them a question about some subject that's already important to them, this fosters a relationship between us that is so much more natural and beautiful than if I ask them a question that is only important to my subjects and not their subjects. So let me give you some concrete examples. I really believe that horsics tend to settle back into thinking about basic needs a little bit more often than people do. Perhaps we could take a cue from that and do it as well. But basic needs are going to be simple things like, do I have enough food? Do I have enough water? Have I had enough rest? Do I have enough friends? Do I have the freedom to make the choices that are right for me? Those are our basic needs. When we can ask horses or other people about how that feels to them and listen to their answers, we're going to find we know them so much better. So that's always where I start every day, every situation where I meet a horse. This is what I'm going to ask first. What's interesting to you about your basic needs? And how do I fit in with those questions and answers? So that is a first question worth asking. Good morning, Shelley. So basic needs, I might move around a horse's space and investigate what kind of food is available to them. What kind of water is there? This helps me do my chores in the morning to make sure that they're safe and fed and all of those things. But when I show interest in the basic needs that horses have, they have a chance to answer me back about what's important to them. So, for instance, if I check the level of their hay feeder and they have no responding interest in that, but instead they're pacing a fence looking for a horse that is too far away from them, that tells me they're a lot more interested in the basic need of how many friends do I have? How are my friends close enough to me? What's my community like? That tells me what's important to them. If I've asked them a question of, do you have enough hay? But they're not interested in that question and answer is not actually very useful to our relationship. It might be interesting to me, but the questions that are interesting to the relationship are going to be questions that are important to my horse. I really believe when we work with horses, we have to ask the questions that are important to them first, and then we can graduate into the questions that are important to us. So we start with basic needs. What's a question worth asking? And I'll boil that down for you. A question worth asking is one that your horse or your partner enjoys answering. So can give you some sort of a response that is on the playing field with the question you asked. So if I say I've got a horse pacing the fence because his friends are too far away, if I go out, check on his friends, and come back to him, what happens? What's the answer to my question? If I show interest in what's important to him, what does he do in response? And I'm going to continue this investigation of what questions are worth asking by what responses I get in return. So if I ask, have you noticed your friends today? And I get a response where he turns his head and looks for them, or he turns away and then turns back, this tells me he is also interested in the answer to that question. Good morning, Mandy. So we start with basic needs. That's a question worth asking. Now, at a certain point, basic needs are filled and they're not of concern anymore. They're maybe not even of interest anymore. And this is where you could see it as a problem to solve, but you could also just see it as a question worth asking. Then from basic needs, we go into safety. How safe are we here? And this is not about the reality of safety, because it's not really about are we safe or are we not safe. That's pretty obvious. It's about the feeling of safety. How do we feel safe? What would we need to pay attention to that made us feel safer? And you can tell this really dramatically by which things horses are willing to pause and consider and think on, particularly if they're free. So if they're free to do whatever they want, when they pay attention to something that makes them feel safer, they will be willing to pause and consider it. When they turn their focus to something that doesn't make them feel safe, they're going to want to move on pretty quickly to something else. And this continually moving on to a new idea tells us that they don't feel particularly safe in any of the ideas, not safe enough to just think on them for a moment. And so what I might do to ask a horse about safety is I might turn my attention to things, pieces of awareness, what's happening on the far hillside. That would be an environmental safety. I might check in with what the other horses are doing. That would be a herd safety. I might check in with myself. How do I feel? How do my shoes fit? Are my shoelaces tied? This is a safety issue for me. Does it stimulate an answer from the horse, which is worth pausing on? That's how I know that we've asked a good safety question. Is there a pause that comes after that consideration? So there's any number of safety questions, but they have to do with awareness of the world around us and awareness of our place in that world. When we ask the right safety questions, we are going to be more involved in the world around us. So a good way to think about this is if we don't ask the right safety questions, we're going to have one of two outcomes. Either the lack of safety questions is going to lead to hyperactivity, an inability to pause on anything, an inability to just rest in understanding something. Or a lack of safety is going to turn into a desire to just sit still and do nothing. So I joke about horses that don't want to get out of the rocking chair on the porch. They just don't want to do anything. And those are horses, in my opinion, have not been asked the right questions about safety to the point where they can dwell on the answer and start becoming inspired to go do something. Once you've asked enough questions about safety, then we're going to get into questions about what the horse feels inspired to do. What tickles their senses? What makes them want to take action that is in harmony with others? Because this is very different from actions that are solely independent. The actions where they want to form parallel lines with others, the actions where they want to do things with others, this is what I call companionship. The horse has an idea and they'd like to take you with them. Whether they'd like to go see if the water trough's full, or they'd like to go see if any of new shoots of a certain plant have come up, or they'd like to go look over the horizon in a certain direction with you. They want to take you with them to do something that feels important to them. Now, how do we ask that question? We ask that question about companionship by pausing long enough in harmony with them. So once we've asked the safety questions, then we get into the companionship questions by just being peaceful. So if you stand next to your horse's shoulder long enough and they feel safe, they will eventually opt to take you somewhere interesting to them. If they don't feel safe, they will turn fast, they will push on you, there will be some push or pull that tells you you're asking the wrong question. So the question of what would you like to do really can only come up once the horse feels safe enough in that pause to consider what it is that they would like to do. Once you're there, they will show you all the things that are interesting to them. Now, we could go back to basic needs at any point, check in with those questions. We could go back to safety at any point and check in with those questions. We can go back to companionship at any point and just pause and wait and see if the horse has something they want to show us. Once that's fulfilled, you're going to sense there's a sort of restlessness in your horse without any pushing or pulling. They feel a little restless, but they're not taking a step towards you or a step away. They just feel like they'd like to do something, but they're not really sure what it is. This is where entertainment comes in. And this is tough for people because we buy horses for entertainment. Entertainment is the ability for us to have an idea and the horse to do what we want. This is a question we can ask, and it's worth asking, but it's really only worth asking if there's a firm enough foundation of basic needs, safety, and companionship. Then we can add entertainment on top of that. So when you're with your horses, when you're with your friends, I really think mammals tend to be a lot the same in these ways. What's a question worth asking? A question worth asking is one that can get a reasonable response. If you ask a question that gets a lot of push and pull, a lot of friction, a lot of chaos, it's probably not quite the right question. And you've gained information by asking it. Now you know a little bit more about where your partner's at. But we're looking for the questions that lead to us feeling more bonded, more connected, more together. And so we ask the questions that lead to answers that put us on the same page, that help us understand each other better. Now, you guys who've been listening to me for a while, you know I like this 80-20 rule. So 20% of the time, I'm going to encourage you to ask a difficult question. I'm going to encourage you to ask the wrong question. I'm going to encourage you to mess it up on purpose, just to see what happens. You get a lot of information from asking the wrong question about who your partner is, because you might think it's the wrong question, and then you ask it, and maybe it goes better than you thought it would, and maybe it's not the wrong question. So this is my advice for everybody, but particularly myself. I have one more clinic here to go in Australia before I head home and see my horses. And I get to work with so many fabulous people and so many fabulous horses. We're doing a herd workshop this week where we're going to work with herds. We're going to watch the questions the horses ask each other. We're going to watch the responses. We're going to learn to see when it's the right question, resulting in more harmony, more cooperation, more ease between partners, and when it's the wrong question. The wrong question is going to result in more push and pull and more chaos or friction in the relationship. It's worth having some mixture of the right questions and the wrong questions, because both lead us to more understanding. I personally like that 80-20% mark, is where 80% of the time I'm feeling more connected, more bonded, more understanding of the relationships around me. 20% of the time, let's stir the pot and see what happens, because maybe I learned something interesting from asking the wrong question. So I hope that's good food for thought, you guys. Thank you for joining me here for tea time. Next week, I will be headed north up to the Canberra area for a little bit of brainstorming with a friend of mine, and then I'll be headed home at Christmas. So I will see you next week for tea time, probably from the Canberra area, and then I will be back in the States after that. Thank you guys for joining me for tea time. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will look forward to next week.